Somewhere in Alexandria, on a night in the 1st century BCE, a building is on fire. Inside that building is somewhere between 40,000 and 400,000 scrolls. Nobody agrees on the exact number because nobody agreed on much of anything about what happened that night, including whether it was one night or a slow decline over centuries, including whether it was an accident or an act of war, including who was actually to blame. What we do know is this: the Library of Alexandria held, at its peak, the largest collection of written knowledge the ancient world had ever assembled. Works of mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and literature that existed nowhere else. Original texts by authors whose names we know only because someone, somewhere, once cited a book that burned that night and was never seen again. We're going to follow 4 people through this fire. A scholar deciding what to save when he can only carry so much. A soldier who started a fire he didn't understand the size of. A priest who chose to pray instead of run. And a poor fisherman who saw an opportunity in the chaos that had nothing to do with knowledge and everything to do with paper. Same fire, 4 completely different nights. The scholar first. His name is lost to us. Most of the individual librarians of Alexandria are, but we know his job. He is one of perhaps a dozen scholars who work in the library's inner rooms, cataloging, copying, and occasionally translating texts brought in from ships that dock at Alexandria's harbor. Egyptian law, under the Ptolemaic kings who built this library, requires that any scroll found on any ship arriving in port must be surrendered to the library to be copied. The owner gets the copy back. The library keeps the original. This is not subtle theft. This is official policy, and it's one of the reasons the collection grew as large as it did. Alexandria didn't just collect knowledge, it legally confiscated it, one shipload at a time. Tonight, he's woken by shouting and the smell of smoke, and within minutes he understands that the fire is real, close, and moving faster than anyone can contain. He has perhaps 20 minutes before the section of the library containing the astronomical texts becomes unreachable. 20 minutes, and he cannot carry everything. He has to choose. He grabs the works of Eratosthenes first, the calculations of the Earth's circumference, astonishingly accurate for a measurement made with sticks and shadows and geometry. Work that won't be matched in accuracy for another 1,700 years. Then he hesitates in front of the medical texts, the ones attributed to physicians whose methods for treating disease were more advanced in some specific ways than what will be practiced in Europe 1,000 years later. He grabs 3 scrolls and has to leave dozens behind. He does not have time to think about what he's leaving. He will spend the rest of his life thinking about it. He saved perhaps 30 scrolls out of a collection that may have held hundreds of thousands. He has no way of knowing, as he runs from the building with his arms full, whether what he grabbed was actually the most important material, or whether he simply grabbed what was nearest in a panic at random and called it a choice. Historians will later debate for 2,000 years exactly how much was lost. The honest answer is that nobody kept a complete catalog, so nobody can say for certain what disappeared. We know some names, physicians, mathematicians, poets, whose entire body of work exists today only as fragments quoted by other later writers who had access to copies before the originals burned. We know the names because those names survived. We don't know how many names didn't survive even that much. The scholar running from the fire with 30 scrolls in his arms doesn't know either. He'll spend decades wondering. The soldier is next, and this is where the story gets less certain because there are at least 3 competing accounts of who actually started the fire from 3 different centuries, and they don't agree. The version involving a soldier comes from an account describing Julius Caesar's involvement in an Alexandrian civil war in 48 BCE. Caesar, trapped in the harbor district with a smaller force than his opponents, ordered his own ships burned to prevent them from being captured. A tactical decision made under pressure with limited visibility of what else might catch fire in the process. Our soldier is one of the men executing that order. He's not thinking about the library. He's thinking about the ships, about the enemy forces closing in, about following orders from a general who has a considerable reputation for winning battles that looked unwinnable. He sets fire to the ships in the harbor as instructed. What he doesn't fully account for, what maybe nobody fully accounted for, is the wind that night and the proximity of the harbor warehouses to at least part of the library's holdings, which by this point had expanded beyond the main building into storage in nearby structures because the library had simply run out of room. The fire spreads from the ships to the docks to the warehouses. Some portion of the library's holdings, how much exactly is one of history's great unresolved arguments, burns as collateral damage in a fire that was never meant to touch it. The soldier doesn't know that night what he's destroyed. He's not thinking in terms of scrolls or knowledge or scholarship. He's thinking about surviving the night and following orders. He will likely never learn the scale of what happened. Ancient soldiers rarely got detailed briefings on the cultural consequences of their tactical successes. He burned some ships, he kept his men alive. By the standards of his job, this was a good night. Third person, the priest. He serves at a temple near the library. Alexandria had several, serving the city's mixed population of Greeks, Egyptians, and Jews. And when the fire spreads close enough that people are fleeing past his temple carrying whatever possessions they can grab, he does not run. This isn't heroism exactly, or at least not in the way it might be framed later. It's theology. He believes sincerely that his temple and the gods it serves are protected by forces the fire cannot touch. He has seen fires before. He has seen the city survive plagues, riots, and previous fires. His understanding of the world includes divine protection for sacred spaces, and abandoning his post would be, in his framework, both cowardly and pointless. If the gods intend to protect this place, prayer is more useful than flight. If they don't intend to protect it, nothing he does will matter anyway. He prays through the night. The fire does not reach his particular temple, whether through luck, wind direction, or the physical distance involved. We can't know, and neither can he. In the morning, he will consider his prayers vindicated. He will tell this story for the rest of his life as evidence of divine protection. He will not consider the possibility that geography and wind patterns had more to do with his survival than his prayers did, because that possibility doesn't exist within his framework for understanding the world. He's not being irrational by the standards of his own knowledge. He's making the same kind of sense-making move that every person in this story is making, interpreting a chaotic, unpredictable event through whatever framework he has available. Fourth person, the fisherman. He's poor, doesn't read, has never had a reason to set foot inside the library, and doesn't understand what's being lost tonight in any of the terms the scholar would use. But he understands something else clearly. Chaos creates opportunity, and papyrus, even burned or damaged, has value. Papyrus scrolls, once stripped away what makes them valuable to scholars, the specific words written on them, are still papyrus. Papyrus can be reused. Blank sections can be cut away and rewritten on. Even badly damaged scrolls can sometimes be sold to scribes willing to scrape off old text and reuse the material, a common and unremarkable practice throughout the ancient world called palimpsesting. While scholars are risking their lives to save specific texts, our fishermen and men like him are moving through the chaos collecting whatever scrolls have been abandoned, dropped, or left in accessible locations without much concern for what's written on them. He can't read the difference between a mathematical treatise and a shopping list. He knows papyrus is papyrus, and a damaged scroll that some panicking scholar dropped while running is still worth something to someone. He fills a sack with what he finds. He will sell it over the following weeks to scribes and merchants who need writing material and don't particularly care about provenance. Some of what he collects might contain unique texts that existed nowhere else. He will never know this. He can't read what he's carrying. To him, it's just paper, and paper is money. And tonight, there is more free paper available than there has ever been in his lifetime. There's no villain in this story, which is part of what makes it so hard to sit with. The scholar did everything he could, and it wasn't enough. The soldier followed orders in a chaotic tactical situation and had no way of foreseeing the consequence. The priest made sense of an inexplicable disaster using the only tools he had. The fisherman found an opportunity in a catastrophe because that's what poor people have always had to do. The value of knowledge means very little when you can't read, and the value of paper means a great deal when you're hungry. Here's what actually happened to the Library of Alexandria, as best as historians can reconstruct it. It wasn't one fire, it was several, spread across centuries. Caesar's fire in 48 BCE, a decline through the following centuries as Roman-era funding and interest waned, further damage during civil conflicts in the 3rd century CE, and a final decline that had less to do with any single dramatic burning and more to do with a slow institutional collapse as the empire that had funded it changed, fragmented, and eventually stopped prioritizing a giant repository of scrolls in a city that was no longer the intellectual capital it had once been. The dramatic single-night burning that gets taught in schools and referenced in documentaries is, according to most serious historians, a simplification, a way of compressing centuries of institutional decay into one vivid, tellable image. The real story is less cinematic and more familiar. An institution that mattered enormously to a small number of people gradually stopped mattering to the people with money and power, and when that happens, buildings and their contents tend to disappear through neglect rather than drama. But the scholar running with 30 scrolls doesn't know that. From where he's standing, on the night his section of the library burns, it feels sudden, total, and irreversible. And in a narrower sense, for the specific texts that were in that specific building on that specific night, he's right. What burned that night didn't come back. Some of it exists today only as titles mentioned in other books, books that survived specifically because their content had been considered important enough to copy and distribute beyond Alexandria before that night. We will never know exactly what we lost. Not the number of scrolls, not the names of most of the authors, not the specific mathematical proofs or medical procedures or historical accounts that existed in exactly one copy and then didn't exist anywhere. What we know is this: knowledge that exists in only one place is one bad night away from not existing at all. The scholar knew this. It's why he ran back inside twice, against his own judgment, before finally accepting he had to leave the rest behind. He carried 30 scrolls out of a building that may have held 400,000. He spent the rest of his life wondering about the other 399,970.